All right, another way that we think about demand and supply is it's telling us what is the marginal cost and what is the marginal benefit of any particular good. We also think about the marginal benefit as your willingness to pay. Not anything to do with a hairpiece, willingness to pay, as in, what are you willing to give up in order to get some particular item, to get some good? And on the supply side, it's giving us our marginal cost, which we can think about as our willingness to sell. How much are you willing to give up in order to be able to sell some item? And is the price you're getting enough to overcome that threshold, that point at which you are willing to sell the X unit or the nth unit or 100th or 1000th or whatever? All right, I said I was going to go into the difference between individual and market, but it's a really simple thing. So if we think about my individual demand curve and then we put it together with your individual demand curve, what we're going to say is at some price, how many units am I willing to buy, plus how many units are you willing to buy? As we lower the price, we're going to mix more people into that, right? So at a very high price, you might only have a few people who are willing and able to buy. Didn't mention that. We'll come back to that in a second. And ability. But let me not get too distracted too soon. When we add together individuals' demand curves or individual supply curves, we get the market supply and demand. Putting this back in terms of a bar chart, we can think of all these different uses for water, and we can color them in by consumers. So maybe for water, at the highest prices, only I am buying. At a lower price, one of you comes back in. At a lower price than that, another one of you is able to buy that fourth unit. And then maybe if the price comes further down, I buy a third unit. Right? So different colors are representing different consumers. In practice, for this class, it's often going to be easier to just think about, here's a person, here's a different person, here's a different person, just to avoid getting too complicated. But fundamentally, what we're talking about, what we're seeing is different uses, and we might expect to see different people clustered around different parts of the demand curve, but fundamentally, we're separating each individual unit of the good that we're talking about. All right, let me get to this point, willingness and ability to buy or sell. So willingness to sell, would you actually, say, mow your neighbor's lawn if they were paying you $50, right? It's a pretty good price to mow a lawn. If that's the case, then at $50, you would be contributing potentially 1 unit of quantity supply. And I'll put in blue down here, quantity demanded. I forgot to do that in the last video. So your willingness and ability to sell, well, you might be willing to mow your neighbor's lawn for $50, but if you don't have a lawnmower, you're not really part of the supply curve for lawn mowing services, right? Likewise, you might be willing to pay $100,000 for a McLaren car. I don't know cars. McLaren's a fancy name. I'm pretty sure their car's like $1 million. I'd be willing to pay $100,000, but am I able to pay $100,000? No. So I'm not really part of the demand curve for that car because although I'm willing, I'm not able. So the demand curve and the supply curve fundamentally is about people who are willing to do a thing and able to do that thing. That leads us into some funny normative territory sometimes. If we're thinking about something like, well, what is the efficient level of cancer treatment? Well, we think about costs and benefits. It feels a little bit weird, but the benefits are someone survives. That's a huge benefit, but it might not be accurately reflected as part of their willingness and ability to pay, particularly when we have a really confusing, messed up system, which the whole world does. It just turns out ours is particularly weird. But that's another issue that we don't have time to get to here. So let's start talking about supply and demand and how we actually use them. So we'll kind of restrict our view to less controversial cases. We'll think about, say, willingness and ability to pay for a vacation to Disneyland or a new car, the sorts of things that cover 90% of your life and mine. Right? Nice, easy, middle-of-the-road stuff. We'll leave the edge cases for discussing at night in your dorm rooms with your friends, which I know doesn't exist anymore, but on your Discord server with your cyber friends. So, supply and demand are roughly giving us marginal cost and marginal benefit of some good. We'll say, you know what, bottled water. Let's not worry about lawns and all the rest. Bottled water in July in Long Island, right? So we're holding constant a time and a place, particular conditions. We know it's hot out. We know that it's sunny. We know that maybe we're staying home more than we might in past years. That might change our willingness and ability to pay for water at any given price. Let's put it all together and see how supply and demand is giving us something. But before I get too far, I want to come back and just remind ourselves of some point in our ceteris paribus assumption. I'm going to draw a small, crappy version of what might be a demand curve. So we got price and quantity. And a thought experiment I like to use in class is, let's imagine we get together 10 years from now. You guys all have high-paying jobs. You got responsibilities. You got mortgages, all those normal stuff that you expect to have 10 years from now. And we ask the question, hey, if I've got a $30,000 used Mercedes S-Class sedan, it's a nice car. $30,000 is not a ridiculous price for that. How many of you guys are interested? And everyone puts up their hand because I told them, let's set that as a baseline. Let's just assume you guys are all interested. But let's ask the question, are you more interested or less interested if we go from 30,000 and high interest and I say $500? What happens to our level of interest? And at first everyone says 500 is much less than $30,000. We should be way more interested. Then I ask, well, what's the difference between a $30,000 car and a $500 car? And everyone pretty quickly picks up on the idea that that $500 car is scrap metal. That is not the same car. So we've got 2 points: low interest for the $500 Mercedes S-Class sedan, 30,000 high interest. Do we just connect those dots and say this is our demand curve? And the answer is no, because we're holding everything constant when we have a two-dimensional graph. We say quantity demanded increases as the price increases, all else equal, but we are not holding equal the perceived quality. So if we add in a new dimension, QU for quality, now we got a three-dimensional shape. Let's say that as we come, we'll say this is negative quality. So as we come away from the whiteboard, we get less interested. So here is our kind of tough to see. Let me make that a little easier to see. Here's our kind of tough to see three-dimensional plot. And for the good quality car close to the whiteboard, we're going to have a normal demand curve, and it's just going to come down and make sort of a big triangle-shaped plane when we have this in 3 dimensions. That's hard enough to show on a whiteboard. It's even harder when I know that the video of the whiteboard is turned back into a 2-dimensional image you're going to be looking at on your phone or computer. It's not easy to work with more than 2 dimensions, and that's part of the reason ceteris paribus is so important. We draw a lot of graphs, and we have to understand what it means to hold all else equal. In this case, what it means is we have one demand curve for the good car, and we have another demand curve for the garbage car. The garbage car, if I said the price is $400, we will have more interest. For the good car, if I say the price is $29,000, we will have more interest. We have downward sloping demand curves in both cases, but we have fundamentally 2 different demand curves because we're thinking about 2 different products, right? Both are a used Mercedes S-Class sedan, but one is functional. All right. Long story short with that, Anytime we break the ceteris paribus assumption, we are going to have to draw a new demand or supply curve to tell that new version of the story. But let's start with the beginning. Economic stories go like this, same as maybe you got in middle school or high school English. Over the course of the story, we go through time, and we start from a low tension situation. Once upon a time, there was a peaceful kingdom. And then things happened, and tension built until you reached a climax and then a resolution. That's how stories go, right? Things are fine, things are in equilibrium in economic stories. Things happen, changes happen, and then we have some resolution, and then we end up at some new equilibrium. And what an equilibrium means is a situation where no one wants to change what they're doing. So in this situation, we have people who might want to buy water, people who might want to sell water, and we have some price that can vary. As the price increases, we're going to have more sellers who want to sell, right? Or Nestle will increase their bottling plant capacity. They will want to sell us more units. At a high price, they can justify paying overtime and running their factory extra hard in order to put out more bottles of water. And at lower prices, you or I might say, hey, if water is a penny a bottle, screw it, I'll get a whole bunch of extra water, even though I might normally just refill a water bottle. Water bottles are convenient, so bottled water at a low enough price, I will start buying more than I otherwise would. That's the behavior we're changing, right? How much do I buy? Do I buy bottled water for low priority uses like leaving spares in my trunk? Or do I restrict my use to only important situations, relatively urgent uses for bottled water, and less of the frivolous uses? Do I cut back how much I use? For the sellers, it's basically how many units do they put out into the market, and they're going to be willing to put out more if the price is high. So let's think about what would happen at a high price given this state of the world. If the price of bottled water is $5 a bottle, there's going to be a lot of willingness to sell. We're going to have a very high number for our quantity supply. Now, important jargon trap here. It's tempting to say we have a high supply at $5, but really we have a high quantity supply. Supply is the entire relationship between price and quantity, all else equal. We have a high quantity supplied, and at this high price, we have a low quantity demanded, and importantly, we have this gap between them. Right? Since we have this gap, we have an unsustainable situation from an economic perspective. We have what we'd call, in this case, either excess supply or more often a surplus. Now, surplus is probably my least favorite bit of economic jargon, as will become clear when I make you more confused when I introduce a different version of it in a different video. So I am not going to call it surplus, I am going to call it excess supply. What we've got here is a mismatch between the actions of the people selling bottled water and the actions of the people buying bottled water. So what happens in this situation under normal circumstances? Well, the suppliers realize we got all these bottles of water in our warehouse. Our money is tied up in this. We could have just put it into investment accounts and earned 3% interest. Instead, we're getting 0% interest, and we have to worry about the safety of the warehouse workers in the meantime. So they're facing costs from having all of this excess inventory. In a situation like that, it makes a lot of sense to just put these bottles of water on sale, lower the price, right? You might say it would be really nice to be able to sell this bottle of water at $5, but if I'm not actually selling at all, I'd be happy to sell it for $4 and actually get the $4, then have it for $5 and not get paid. So the seller, they're going to be moving down their supply curve in this process, but we're also going to be moving down the demand curve. As buyers, we have a lot more uses we can justify spending $4 for a bottle of water than $5. Now, I suspect you're like me, I'm not going to buy bottled water at $4 either. But there are going to be some people who are willing to do that. Maybe people in airports who are about to get on a plane. There are uses where you might say at $5, I'll just be thirsty on this flight. At $4, fine. I'm willing to part with my money for a $4 bottle of water. In any case, and again, airports are a different market. We're not dealing with that here. We're holding that constant, but it's an example to try and drive home that weird stuff does happen over here. All right, back on task. Price goes down, quantity demanded increases, quantity supplied decreases, and we close this gap. We get rid of our excess supply. Now let's say we overshoot. We end up with a price down here. Let's say this is like 25 cents. So here's $5, here's 0.25. The price is too low, so now we've got the reverse problem. Now quantity demanded exceeds quantity supplied. This is the situation we had with toilet paper a few months ago, and actually kind of still even now. The quantity that people want to buy at the current prices far outstrips how much is available at those prices. So what happens here? Well, under normal circumstances, which we are not in for toilet paper, but let's say for bottled water, at a price of 25 cents, people say, hey, this is a great deal, but the shelves are empty. So maybe you go out to the parking lot, you see someone with a pallet of bottled water, and you say, hey man, I'll give you 50 cents a bottle if you give me one of those flats. In that case, we're going to be moving one of these units of water from a low valued buyer to a higher valued buyer, right? Which is a good thing. That's an increase in value for everyone. He gets a few bucks in his pocket, you get some bottled water at still a price you are willing to pay. You're willing to pay because you value the water more than the 50 cents you give up for each bottle. The people in the store, they overhear this, they go back inside, they see that their shelves are empty, they see that people want the water, and they know that they can get away with charging a higher price. So they charge a higher price, and that gives them more incentive to order more bottles of water. Right? Or Pepsi operates their bottling factory more because they're bringing in more money so they can afford to pay for the electricity necessary to run all the machines. As the price goes up, quantity supplied goes up, and again, we close this gap. We get rid of what we could have called excess demand, more often called a shortage. We close that gap, and again, we push up to this point here. Now this point here, this is the last thing I'm going to draw on this graph before starting again. This we call either the equilibrium point, or we call this the market clearing point. This is the point that is the combination of the price and the quantity, where quantity supplied equals quantity demand. I know I said I wasn't going to draw anything more on that. I promise I'm going to stop. So at a price of, say, 50 cents, the amount people want to buy is equal to the amount people want to sell at a price of 50 cents. So we are in equilibrium. No one wants to change what they're doing. No one wants to buy more at that price. No one wants to offer to pay a higher price because their demand is currently being unsatisfied. It is being satisfied. So they're happy to buy that amount. Happy might not be the right word, but they are satisfied enough that they don't want to change what they're doing. And the sellers are in the same boat. They don't want to sell more at this price. They don't want to cut back production at this price. The quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. And everyone in the market is able to come to the market, see, I'm getting enough value to warrant what I'm spending. They buy what they want and they go home. The sellers come to the market, they sell what they want and they go home. The people who aren't willing to sell say it's not worth it at this price, they go home. The buyers who aren't willing to buy at this price, they say it's not worth it, they go home. And imagine a physical marketplace. That market physically clears when we get the right price. If we have too low a price, we've got a bunch of buyers standing around waiting for someone to show up to sell them some toilet paper. Or if our price is too high, we got a whole bunch of sellers standing around waiting for someone to come buy their $5 bottle of water, and they don't go home and the market isn't clearing. That's a weird analogy that makes more sense if you think about like a medieval market where you meet in person. But the equivalent in a modern economy, or let's say the market for bottled water in Long Island in 2020, we'd really be thinking about, do the sellers have way too much stuff in their warehouses versus are the buyers finding empty shelves when they go to try and buy something? All right, so that's equilibrium. This is what happens when we put demand and supply together. We find this one point where everything balances, where we're coordinating the wishes of buyers and sellers, and as long as the price is able to adjust, we expect it to move to this point, right? So this is our big prediction with supply and demand. Now, when we say supply and demand says such and such, we're really talking about what we're going to talk about in the next video, which is when we change ceteris paribus, how do we adjust? What direction do we move in from here when conditions change?